I shouldn't have boarded that flight. Even now, when I closed my eyes, I can still smell the metallic stench of the cabin, feel the suffocating air pressing down on my lungs, and hear the faint whispers that began long before we ever left the ground. It was Halloween night. Strange how that detail means everything to me now. At the time, it felt like nothing more than a coincidence, a frustrating holiday delay, a ruined evening. The airport was a chaos of restless bodies and hollow complaints. Most of the passengers had been reassigned to other flights. Some were lucky enough to afford a hotel nearby. And then there was me, one of the unlucky few, condemned to wait out the endless hours in a sterile terminal until at last our flight was called. I remember thinking of it as a small blessing, a nearly empty plane, fewer people, quieter. A rare luxury only first-class travelers usually tasted. I smiled to myself as I boarded, relieved at the thought of an empty row, maybe even an entire section to myself. I chose a quiet seat near the front. The windows were black mirrors, reflecting only my own tired face. Outside, the world had vanished into pure darkness. The others, the handful of passengers left, clustered in the back rows. There was something almost tribal in the way they gathered together, their belongings piled close, their voices low but urgent. They looked like survivors clinging to one another after some disaster. I thought it odd, but dismissed it. I always preferred solitude. The delay had transformed our trip. It was supposed to be a sunny daytime flight, with sprawling views of clouds and light breaking on the horizon. Instead, we were swallowed whole by the night. The cabin lights hummed weakly overhead, and shadows stretched too far into the corners. The plane seemed smaller, tighter than I remembered, almost coffin-like. That claustrophobic unease crept up my spine. I tried to distract myself, pulled out my phone, flipped through a book. That's when it happened. A flight attendant approached. She had the same polished smile they all wear, but something about her eyes betrayed urgency. "Sir, would you mind moving to the back, with the others?" It was an unusual request. I blinked, confused. Why move me? Why now? She gave no reason, only that same strained smile. And like a fool, I agreed. I picked up my bag, stood, and walked down the aisle. But even as I sat with the others, a heavy dread clawed at me. Why didn't I ask why? The shift was immediate. The cabin, once buzzing faintly with tired conversations, plunged into silence. I felt it. The atmosphere thickening, pressing down like invisible hands. The passengers around me lowered their voices to whispers. Their eyes, wide, frightened, were all fixed on something at the far corner of the cabin. I followed their gaze, and that was when I saw it. A body, strapped neatly into a seat, pale, motionless, its head slumped at an unnatural angle. A corpse. We were about to fly through the night with the dead seated among us. I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it, that the terror ended there in that first glimpse of hollow eyes and waxy skin, but that was only the beginning, only the first crack in a nightmare that would swallow every last one of us whole. I told myself it wasn't real, that maybe my eyes were exhausted, that maybe I was seeing things in the dim, flickering light of the cabin. But no, there was no mistaking it. The figure slumped in the corner seat wasn't sleeping. It was dead. The skin was gray, almost wax-like, stretched too tightly across its skull. The lips had pulled back just enough to expose a row of teeth. The head was tilted in that unnatural way only lifeless bodies can bend, as though the muscles had long since given up the burden of holding it upright. Its hands rested limply on the armrests, veins dark against the pale flesh, fingers curled inward like claws. The sight turned my stomach. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought I might vomit right there in the aisle. I knew what it meant. The staff had left a corpse on board. Somewhere in the rational part of my brain, I tried to stitch together an explanation. Maybe the passenger had died mid-boarding or even moments before the delay ended, and the airline had decided not to offload them. Maybe there were protocols, policies, things I wasn't privy to as just another traveler. Surely, I told myself, the crew was simply following some procedure. But deep inside, the explanation didn't matter. The truth was much simpler. I was trapped inside a metal coffin, thousands of feet above the earth, with death itself seated only a few rows behind me. The passengers whispered furiously, their voices thin with panic. They can't just leave it there. God, what if it moves? This isn't right. Something's wrong. I kept my head down, pretending not to hear, but the whispers slid into my ears anyway, wrapping around my thoughts. My chest grew heavy, my breaths came shallow, and the longer I stared at the lifeless form, the more the cabin seemed to bend under its presence. The air grew colder, the shadows stretched longer, and the corpse seemed to sag further into the seat, as if it were melting. I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself, stood on trembling legs, and hurried toward the restroom. I locked the door behind me, pressing my back against the thin panel as though that flimsy barrier might shield me from the sight of that thing. The silence inside was unbearable. The tiny mirror above the sink reflected my pale, sweating face. I turned on the tap, splashing cold water against my skin, whispering, "Get a grip, get a grip. It's just a body, just a body." Then it came. Bang! A thunderous slam against a restroom door. The sound reverberated through the cramped space, shaking the walls, making the mirror rattle against its frame. My chest seized. I pressed my mouth to my hand, stifling a cry. Bang! Bang! 2 more blows, harder, more violent. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't my imagination. Someone or something was on the other side, pounding to get in. And then, silence. The sudden stillness was worse than the noise. The only sound left was my own ragged breathing, the frantic pounding of my heart. I wanted to scream for help, but the words stuck in my throat. An awful thought struck me. What if I wasn't safer in here? What if the very thing I was trying to escape was standing right outside this thin door? I pressed my ear to the panel, listening. Nothing. Not a shuffle, not a footstep, just emptiness. I waited. A minute, 2. Time felt broken. Finally, gathering what little courage I had, I slid the lock and cracked the door open. The aisle stretched out in eerie silence. No one was there. But I couldn't shake it. The sound, the pounding. Someone or something had been there. Someone had wanted me out. And as I stepped cautiously into the aisle, my heart froze. The corpse wasn't where it had been before. It had moved.
I should have stayed in that restroom. Even with the suffocating silence and the trembling walls, I should have locked the door and never come out, because the moment I stepped back into that aisle, I realized something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. The corpse had moved. Not far, just a few seats down from where it had been before, but enough. Enough for me to know, with a gut-twisting certainty, that something unnatural was unfolding in that cabin. The body wasn't slumped in the same twisted angle anymore. The head had shifted. The chin was lifted slightly, tilted toward the aisle, as if it had turned to look at me. I froze there, half hidden in the shadows, unable to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to alert someone, to tear down the cabin door and fling myself into the night. But my legs betrayed me. I stood locked in place, watching, waiting, terrified that at any moment it would rise. That's when she appeared, the flight attendant, the same one who had insisted I move earlier. She emerged from the front of the plane, pushing her service trolley down the aisle. I nearly jumped out of my skin, stumbling back against the wall. She smiled. Too quickly, too smoothly, like someone snapping on a mask. "Excuse me," she said politely, steering the trolley past me. But then she stopped. Her head turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine, and the smile stayed fixed on her lips, but her gaze, God, her gaze was wrong. It wasn't the look of a stranger being courteous. It wasn't professional. It was knowing, cold, accusatory, as if she could see the panic boiling beneath my skin, as if she knew I had witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. She stared at me too long. Seconds stretched into an eternity. I broke the gaze, looking at the floor. But even then, I felt her eyes burning into me, hollow and unblinking. And then she moved on, just like that, serving drinks to the other passengers as though nothing had happened. Not a word about the banging they had heard, not a hint of acknowledgement that the corpse had shifted seats. But the other passengers, they noticed. I saw it in the way they huddled tighter together, whispering in frantic tones, their faces pale with dread. One woman crossed herself repeatedly, her lips moving in silent prayer. A man clutched his backpack to his chest as though it might protect him from what was happening all around us. And all the while, the smell began to spread. It started faint, just a sour note at the back of my throat. But within minutes, the odor of decay was impossible to ignore. It clung to the air, thick and rancid, like rotting meat left in the sun. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but the stench seeped through anyway, invading every breath. I turned, eyes watering, and nearly screamed. The corpse's eyes were open, wide, unblinking, glazed over with the dull sheen of death, but locked directly at me. I stumbled back into my seat, heart thrashing against my ribs, bile rising in my throat. Around me, the whispers grew louder, though I could no longer tell if they came from the passengers or from something else entirely. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The attendants weren't just ignoring what was happening. They were part of it.
If I had any sanity left, I should have begged the attendants to let me off that plane before it even left the runway. But by then, we were already in the air, swallowed by darkness, thousands of feet above the earth, with no escape. And that's when the voices began. At first, I thought it was just the passengers behind me, whispering nervously the way frightened people do when they want to convince themselves everything is fine. But no, this was different. The whispers weren't localized. They weren't coming from one direction. They floated through the cabin like mist, slipping between seats, crawling into my ears no matter how tightly I pressed my hands against them. At first, it was intelligible, low murmurs like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Words began to take shape. Phrases. Don't leave. Join us. We're still here. Every syllable was drenched in sorrow, like a funeral hymn hummed in the dark. It felt as though hundreds of unseen mouths were pressed close to my skin, whispering directly into my bones. I glanced at the other passengers. Some had their hands clamped over their ears, shaking their heads violently. Others wept quietly, rocking back and forth as though trying to soothe themselves. One man in the far aisle seat clawed at his own face as if he could scrape the voices out of his skull. And the attendants? They glided down the aisles with those artificial smiles stretched across their faces, serving drinks as if nothing were happening. Their silence was deafening. The whispers never touched them, or maybe they welcomed them. Their eyes flicked over us, blank and cold, as if they were watching cattle slowly losing their minds. The stench of decay thickened. It wasn't just a smell anymore, it was a taste, metallic and rotten, coating my tongue until I gagged. I pressed my face into my sleeve, praying it was just my imagination. But when I dared to lift my eyes again, I saw why. The corpse. Its mouth was open now, wide, too wide. The jaw unhinged at an angle no human mouth could reach. From it, a faint wheeze slipped out like the last breath of someone who had drowned. And the whispers were loudest when I looked at it. I couldn't bear it. I tried to rise, to move, to run down the aisle and pound on the cockpit door until anyone explained what was happening. But my body betrayed me. My legs wouldn't work. My chest felt heavy, like invisible hands were pressing me into the seat. The woman beside me leaned close, her eyes bloodshot, her lips trembling. "You hear it too, don't you?" she asked, her voice cracked, desperate. "It's not just me." Before I could answer, the lights flickered, once, twice, then dimmed until the entire cabin glowed with a sickly, unnatural light. Shadows stretched across the walls, bending and twisting into shapes that didn't belong to any human form. And in that pale glow, I saw something that shattered the last of my composure. The seats, once half empty, were now full. Every row, every seat. Figures sat rigid in the shadows, their skin ashen, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in unison with the whispers. They weren't passengers. They weren't alive. They were echoes of something long dead, crowding the cabin in silent mockery of life. And yet, when I looked around, none of the attendants reacted. None of the living passengers screamed. It was as though I was the only one who could see them. The whispers swelled, louder, suffocating, until I couldn't tell if they were inside my head or coming from the corpses seated all around me. My vision blurred, and the woman beside me gripped my arm so tightly her nails dug into my flesh. "They're not gone. They never left this plane." And at that moment, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just a flight. This was a graveyard in the sky.
I swear to you, I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. Everything I'm about to describe happened exactly as I saw it. And God help me, I'll carry those images with me until the day I die. The whispers had reached a fever pitch. By then, they weren't whispers anymore. They were screams, agonized, pleading cries that shook the air itself. I clutched my ears until my nails drew blood, but it didn't matter. The voices weren't outside me anymore. They were inside. They lived in my head, filling every corner of my thoughts, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat. And then, the lights died. The cabin was plunged into a suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint red strips along the floor. The engines hummed somewhere below, but even that felt distant, as though the plane itself were drifting through some place it didn't belong. That's when I felt it. Movement. Not the familiar sway of turbulence or the tilt of descent. This was different, deliberate. Slow, dragging footsteps echoing down the aisle. I didn't want to look. God knows I didn't. But the compulsion was stronger than me. My eyes lifted, and I saw it. The corpse. It was standing. Its limbs hung awkwardly like a puppet pulled by strings, its head lolled from side to side, and its eyes, those awful milky eyes, locked onto mine as it staggered forward. The mouth gaped open, jaw unhinged, and the whispers poured from it like smoke. I tried to scream, but my throat was sealed shut by terror. The woman beside me clawed at my arm, shrieking that it was coming for us. But no one else moved. No one else even reacted. The attendants still walked the aisles with their service trolleys, their smiles frozen, their eyes glazed, as though they didn't see the nightmare unfolding among us. And then the lights flickered back on. For a moment I thought it was over, that maybe my mind had snapped under the pressure and invented everything. But when the lights steadied, my stomach lurched. The plane was full. Every seat. Dozens, no, hundreds of passengers who hadn't boarded. Their faces pale, their skins sagging, their mouths moving in unison, whispering the same damned words. Some had wounds, bruises around their necks, burns across their arms, faces frozen in expressions of terror. And every one of them stared directly at us, their living counterparts, with eyes that held nothing but hunger. I begged myself not to blink, not to believe, but the truth was undeniable. We weren't flying with strangers anymore. We were flying with the dead. The woman beside me turned, her face streaked with tears. "They died here," she whispered. "They died on this flight, and now we're next." Her words barely left her lips before the plane lurched violently. Drinks spilled, overhead compartments rattled. The attendants didn't flinch. They just kept walking, smiling, as if turbulence didn't exist in their world. The corpse in the aisle reached me. Its hand, a withered claw of flesh, lifted and pressed against my shoulder. Cold, so impossibly cold. The whispers surged until I thought my skull would split open. And then, nothing. Silence. The next thing I remember is waking to daylight. The plane was parked neatly at the gate, sunlight spilling through the windows. The cabin was empty. Every seat vacant. No passengers, no attendants, only me. I stumbled into the aisle, disoriented, clutching my head. My bag was strapped neatly into the seat beside mine, but on top of it, attached by a worn airline tag, was the name that wasn't mine. It was the name of the dead passenger. I staggered off the plane into the terminal, half expecting the world outside to be gone, replaced with some endless void. But no, it was just another busy airport morning. People laughed, phones rang, coffee steamed. Life went on, and yet, even now, I still hear it. When I lie awake at night, I hear the whispers creeping back, faint at first, then louder. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window and swear there are rows of hollow-eyed passengers seated behind me, waiting, watching. I know what happened on that flight. I know why the attendants made me sit with the others, why the corpse had been left strapped into its seat, why the whispers wanted me. That flight never should have taken off. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I wonder if maybe it never did.